Hello, everyone. We are here today for another Malazan discussion, and I am joined by my excellent friend, Dr. AP Canavan. Hello, AP. How are you today?
Hello, my nemesis.
Oh boy, I expect a few fireballs today, perhaps.
Well, actually, you know what? A little bird told me it is basically your birthday. Depending on when this video goes up, it's your birthday. Therefore,
Yeah.
I'm going to try to be especially nice to you today.
Oh, that's so sweet. Well,
Happy birthday, Philip. Happy
thank
birthday.
you. And it just so happens that I got something in the mail from someone, and it was addressed to Dr. Philip Fantasy Chase. And I had to think to myself, because there was no sender named on this particular package. And I thought to myself, who could this possibly be? Also, I was a little bit worried that the mail carrier might think that I'm some kind of porn star or something.
I've only just realized that.
Well, I mean, so anyway. So anyway, I want to thank you for the present. And my wife suggested that I wait to open it for our discussion. So I am now opening my present from you, Professor Fireballs. So everyone can see what you got me for my birthday. And here we have. But I thought this was a cape. I'm supposed to have a cape.
That's not from me.
No?
No, that's not from me.
Who gave me this thing?
I have no idea.
Well,
but you're very, very pretty.
It comes with a little pin too. It's got little.
If I had to guess, I'd probably say that was maybe Paul.
Oh, but how does he know my address?
I don't know. I sent you different things that would have actually been appropriate for you to open on channel, which was the books.
Oh dear. Well, it wasn't you. Wow. Well, whoever it was, thank you very much. I am actually not 21. I am a little bit older than that. You'd have to add about 28 years to get to the right age. But so that wasn't from you. Who else would call me Dr. Philip Fantasy Chase? Huh.
Although it's because I did have the books addressed that way, and I went,
yeah.
It has just occurred to me that actually, if people don't understand the joke, that's slightly worrying for the mail carrier.
Well, anyway, whoever gave it to me, reveal yourself in the comments. We have a little mystery, a birthday mystery here then. So that's funny. But anyway, thank you so much. And yeah, it's in a few days, but close enough. So anyway, yeah, but we have some serious business here today, which is we are going to be discussing Ian C. Esslemont's Orb, Sceptre, Throne. This is the non-spoiler discussion of Orb, Sceptre, Throne, which is the fourth book in the novels of the Malazan Empire. And the spoiler discussion will be appearing on Dr. Canavan's channel, A Critical Dragon, in a few days after this one airs. So, all right, there's a lot I want to talk about here in the non-spoilers. And I want to start with the fact that, and this is very obvious on the cover. I don't know if you can see that, but there's nice little like bluish, purplish lights here in the city in the background. I love this cover. Very nice art here.
But disappointingly, no ships.
No, there they are. They're in the background. Oh. There have to be ships. It's a novel.
There have to be ships. It's an Ian C. Esslemont novel.
Exactly. So, but it is Darujistan, of course, and the lights are there. The gas lights are a clue. It also discusses that on the back cover. And it's wonderful to visit Darujistan here in this book, and to have Esslemont's. I believe this is the first time I've read Esslemont's take on Darujasan. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. And also, but it definitively a lot of the characters that people would be familiar with from Gardens of the Moon.
Yes, yes. Yeah, we get to see a lot of those beloved characters in Orb, Scepter, Throne, which is fantastic. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And there are also some elements of the Malazan world that I've always been curious about, because I've approached the whole thing by initially reading Stephen Erickson's The Malazan Book of the Fallen. And so there were certain elements that were given sort of, that appeared in there, but I wanted more of. And this is a book that delivers. And particularly, we'll have to talk about both of them, but the Moranth are important in this book, and also the Sagula are important in this book. And we'll be talking about both of them. Let's start with the Moranth. And obviously no spoilers yet, but I think in a general sense, we can talk about some of the themes that accompany the Moranth. One of them that came across very strongly to me in here is the horrors of war. And when you think about the evolution of war and the development, in our world, of gunpowder and various, going from there, levels of technology where you often see tactics lagging 50 years behind the technology. And this is something that you really see with the Moranth munitions, and it just changes the whole perception of warfare in a way. It's very gut-wrenching, and the horrors of modern war, really, because of the capabilities of their munitions, which you'd be familiar with if you've read just about any Malazan book. So that was something that came across to me. I'm sure you picked up on that as well in here.
And so it's when we met the Moranth first, say in Gardens of the Moon, and we get told about the munitions, we get told about them using the quarrel as the sort of dragonfly helicopters, kind of very similar to the opening of a Vietnam War movie with the guy coming in on the chopper, and the chopper coming down and everyone bailing out.
Yeah,
we had a lot of that in Gardens of the Moon. And it was always this very, very strange thing of trying to work that into a fantasy world with the magic and the Warrens and the Trigil Trade Guild.
yeah.
But the Moranth were so mysterious. They were relatively isolationist, but heavily involved in trade, which seems oxymoronical. But
Yeah.
they had their area of the mountains, which was their homeland, that no one was allowed in. But
Right.
they had the all of the trade that they did in this alliance with the Malazans.
Right.
So seeing a lot more of who the Moranth are, where they come from, in much the same way that, say, the Imas and the Barghast are explored in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, we see that aspect of the Moranth and the Segula. And we see the different approaches that both these races have to the idea of self-defense, the idea of army, the idea of military, and how they have evolved in very different directions. Because again, like the Segula are again an isolationist, very scary, mysterious race that they stay pretty much on their island, and then anytime they need something, they go out in a boat and just go and take it.
Yeah, that's their diplomacy.
We've come across that, but both races, both peoples, both cultures are very, very different, and yet there's a sort of similarity to what they are, and then we see through their comparison or contrast these differences in how they approach the world differently. Where the Segula were very isolationist, we see what's the big advantage the Moranth had. They engaged with the world, they engaged with trade, because that they are known in the world, even though where they live, they go, get off my lawn, no visitors, no posting bills.
Right.
And yeah, I think this theme working the munitions into a fantasy world, I think both Esslemont and Erickson were very aware of, once this genie is out of the bottle, once you start adding in alchemical explosives,
Yeah.
it has to go somewhere. There has to be a ramification for it, because
Right.
otherwise your world building is stunted. And it's a nice superficial touch to have in it, but if it doesn't have ramifications, if it doesn't have ways of working into the world and changing the world, then it just sits on top as a nice element that has never been fully integrated.
Yeah.
And that's what we see both in the Malazan Book of the Fallen and the novels of the Malazan Empire. Because if you remember in Stonewielder, what did we see with the Moranth ships?
Oh yeah. The Greek
That
fire.
the Greek fire, the napalm that they used, that standard naval tactics, the ruse ships, the any ships on the water, it didn't matter what the great tactics were of the past, how good these ships were, how good their magic was,
Yeah.
because faced with this new technology,
Mm-hmm.
tactics had changed, warfare had changed, and even then they were the soldiers then looking on at this looked on in horror.
Right. And in contrast, the Segula are archaic in terms of the way they conduct warfare, in a sense, because they use blades, they use swords, right? So that's an interesting contrast as well.
But we see with the Segula, and we have seen them in previous books, because both like Memories of Ice, in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, but also in previous books in the novels of the Malazan Empire. Because remember,
Yeah.
Return of the Crimson Guard, who is the great swordsman.
Yes, of course. Yeah, in exile. Yeah.
And this is the thing, they have taken an ancient martial art and they have perfected it. They are the greatest duelists, sword wielders
Yeah.
on the planet. Like, no one is as good as them. They
Right.
are literally the best at this. That, and we see that the punitive army in Memories of Ice is 3 Segula.
Agree.
Um,
Yeah.
but so it's a different approach to understanding your place in the world, about venerating traditions,
Yes.
celebrating traditions, or evolving from those traditions, being mindful of the past but moving forward. And there are pros and cons to both. It's not that all progress is good, forget about the past, or we must always venerate the past and remain there fixed.
Yeah.
There are aspects of both.
Yeah.
And when they get taken to the extremes, the way that these two peoples have, that's where we get the greatest contrast between them.
Yes, indeed. And this is also where we see Esslemont and Erickson, the anthropologists slash archaeologists. And in many senses, I love that they really bring, I think, some anthropological insights into the creation of these cultures, which feels so beautifully sketched. The Segula, for example, are a wonderful example of a very high context culture. And the cultures around them, in contrast, could be described as more low context. And let me just define that, because some people are not going to be familiar with those terms maybe. But so high context cultures tend to rely on body language, and they won't necessarily speak things out explicitly. They will look for signals from people. And I'll give an example. And low context cultures, of course, are the opposite. You have a spectrum, basically. And in a low context culture, people just spell out what they want or what they mean. They say it. So they rely more on verbal communication. So an example, a great example, something that really happened to me. So I come from a very low context culture, one of the most low context in the world, the United States of America, where we tend to do a lot of talking and we tend to say what we mean for the most part. There are lots of exceptions. And by the way, I don't know if this is still true or not, but when I was studying all this, I think it was said that men tend to also be more low context and women tend to be more high context. In other words, women pay more attention to body language and other things than typically. Of course, these are generalizations, but so anyway, I come from a more low context culture. I lived in a very high context culture in Nepal, where people look for body language and signals, and there are various conventions that are not spoken but are understood. So this resulted in some somewhat comical situations, and I blame myself because I'd go over to dinner to a Nepali family's house, and I was fed very generously because they're marvelous hosts over there. And because I was always taught to finish all the food on my plate, I would eat all the food on my plate. At which point the host or hostess would say, "Oh, well, have some more." And I would say, "Oh, no, really, I'm full." And then plop, more food appears on my plate. And I was like, "Wait, I just said no." Okay. So I would, because I eat all the food on my plate, I would, eat all the food. Okay, now I'm really full. "Oh, would you like some more?" "No, really, I'm full." Now plop. I'm bursting here. So you see what I mean? So I was inadvertently signaling by finishing all the food on my plate that I wanted more. And if I really, really, really wanted to tell them, "No, I don't want any more," I needed to be more aggressive about saying no. I could put my hands over the plate or something like that, just to really say, "I really mean it. I don't want more." And of course, the opposite can happen. I have a Nepali friend here in the United States who once was at an American household for dinner when he was very new to the culture. And the host asked him, "Would you like some more food?" And my Nepali friend, being very polite Nepali, gave the signal. He said verbally, "No, no, no, it's okay, I'm full." But he said it in a way a Nepali person would understand. Oh, he wants more, and would put more food on the plate. But his host didn't get that, and the host said, "Okay," and put the food away. So there you have illustrated the difference between a low context and high context culture. So this is all by the way of saying that the Segula are very high context culture. And a lot of the misunderstandings that we get between them and other cultures are a result of low context cultures not getting the signals. So, famously, going anywhere near a weapon is a challenge to a Segula, right? So it's a really fun thing and interesting how cultures can misread each other. And I feel like Esslemont is having a lot of fun with that in this book with the Segula.
And what's fascinating is for a culture to explore this, he created the Segula, a culture that wears a face mask.
Yeah.
Therefore, you cannot ever read facial expressions.
Yeah.
And what do they practice? Swordplay, which is about reading someone's stance, looking for a feint, looking at the grip of how they're holding their weapon, how their feet are set, the tensing of their muscles. They are experts at reading the body language in combat. That is everything that they are trained to. It's very, very physical. Yeah. And you cannot ever read someone's facial expression.
Right.
So you see this wonderful mixing of, if you're going to explore this concept, let's explore it with a race that's taken it to an exaggerated level, because, it's a fantasy world. We can literalize it and make it very, very extreme. So it is easier to understand, easier to assimilate. And I think one of the things that's fascinating that I found about this book is there was a wonderful, very minor sort of critique of what we do when we're in a foreign culture.
Uh-huh.
So, for instance, when the Segula are outside of their island, right, they expect everyone to follow the principles of their culture, because, well, why wouldn't you? This is obvious. This is how everyone lives. Right. And if you do not respond to them in the way that their culture demands, there can be, fatal consequences.
Right.
And and then if someone arrives in their culture, because we heard this story from Ian Esslemont, but we won't go into it here. We can talk about it in the spoilers.
Yeah.
But we got the story of how a certain character arrived on the Segula Island,
Yeah.
and was expected, didn't understand the culture, and ended up in a whole sequence of constant duels.
Because he wasn't reading the signals. Yeah.
So everywhere apparently has to obey the Segula culture. And you go, but this is exactly what we do when we
Yeah.
go somewhere. We go, well, they didn't respond to me the way that they should have.
Yep.
Or when we're in a foreign country and we project, but this isn't how it is at home. And you go, no, it's how it is in their home. And it's trying to understand this other perspective that isn't yours, to try and be aware that our own cultural bias, our own cultural filters can often blind us to the fact that there's a completely different way of reading a situation, of actually experiencing reality.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a fascinating take, because obviously some of the characters, we get this insight into how the Segula view the world.
Yes. Yeah. And it's so masterfully done. And just it's comical in places, and of course it has really serious consequences in other places. The rigidity of a culture also can, and their lack of understanding of the way other people do things can have disastrous consequences. So yeah, and we see that time and time again. But yeah, so another element in here, if we can move on from the Moranth and the Segula, is there is some element, and we're not going to give details here, but there's some element of Teist and the culture in here as well. In a sense, it's a presence that is very strongly felt. Let's put it that way. But I love what Esslemont does in here with that as well, because this is a theme that I really resonate with, and I've talked about it before when we've talked about the poems, the Malazan poems, and this idea of life's fleetingness and the layers of time and history, and this just beautiful tapestry that is woven for us here in this series. But it's a beautiful tapestry because you have these very ancient threads in it of cultures that have existed for so long, and they are so, to the mortals of the present, they have such a looming presence, and it just, they're a deep mystery, and that is something that comes across beautifully in this book in terms of the Teist and D part of Orb, Sceptre, Throne.
And it's fascinating because obviously the archaeological aspect of this,
Yes.
of digging into the past to try and uncover the truth. And like one of the things that we've been discussing, obviously just before this, was the Segula and the Moranth. And what we have are different ways of exploring what was the past, what happened in the past, what is the truth of that, and how over time things can change, things can be misunderstood, things can be forgotten, other things can be emphasized that are a slight twisting of what happened, and then over time that changes. So we see the direct contrast between academics and looters, and the sort of the gold rush mentality of, like the old colonial explorers, antiquarians, who would, oh yes, we rocked up and we found all of these things, so we've just taken them back to our country.
Yeah.
You're just looting tombs, aren't you? No. We're rescuing these things. They're now going to look very nice on my mantelpiece.
Yeah.
That there's that aspect of archaeology. There's the aspect of the bumbling academic digging into things that they don't really understand.
Yes.
And then there's the aspect of someone who genuinely cares about the past and understanding it, and has spent time studying it, and this is an opportunity to immerse themselves in it, and it's a magical, personal, elevatory experience.
Yes.
That there are all of these different aspects, and then we have, the transition of the past affecting the future, the repercussions of what happened in Gardens of the Moon are being played out here, the repercussions of Toll Hounds are being played with here. Mm-hmm. That these other books, this history, both the modern history of the Malazan world and the ancient history of the Malazan world, are coming into conflict, and it is both the savior and the destruction coming from the same source.
Yeah.
And it's all about how you interpret it, how you interact with the past, and that aspect of it. And it's a fascinating exploration of what time and culture and history mean to us in that contemporary setting.
Yep. Another book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen that has major reverberations in Orb, Sceptre, Throne is Memories of Ice. That's a big one for this as well. So I'll get no spoilers, but yeah, that's a book that has major repercussions in here, which is, it's really cool to see that some of these storylines continued here in novels of Malazan Empire. I just love it. So,
and what's actually really amazing about that is I think you can actually just read this book and enjoy it without knowing those things, because the central elements from those other books, you get told the sort of the précis, the shortened form, so you have the important information. Yes, you didn't experience the events as you would if you had read that novel, but you know what happened, and it's the repercussions worked out. And it's the same thing happens as a byplay between these two different series, because they're talking about the same world, they're exploring the same world and the same history, and each time it's taken from a different angle, and it's a different view of the world and focusing on different aspects and things that I think some people in the Malazan Book of the Fallen said, oh, I wish I knew more about this thing. You go, well, that's here. And when you're reading this, you go, oh, I wish I knew more about this thing. You go, funny you should mention that. That actually comes up in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. That it's the complexity of interaction in this world, in this fictional history. And we think about we see all of this in any major sort of conflict or period of history of tumultuous change in our world, that there are all of these different stories, and depending on which ones that you pick up on, you can go, oh, well, I'll tell the story of X, and you have to include little bits of something else that someone goes, oh, that's really interesting. You go, this other author wrote the story of Y that has those things as their central concern. So it's a wonderful companion, as well as a book on its own.
Indeed. Yeah, I agree completely. And then there are these characters that I find myself relating to more and more as I get deeper into not only novels of the Malazan Empire, but as we continue our reread of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And these are the Malazans, the soldiers, and their various regiments, and it's really something how these soldiers get done what needs to be done. It's something that Quick Jen talked about in one of her videos recently when she talked about the heavies. Great video. But these people are in some way, I think they're us in the story. They're these mortals who are put in these situations that they're way in over their heads, and they are dealing with powers that are, even though they get the Moranth munitions, and that's more than anything, we didn't mention this earlier, but the Moranth munitions are the means by which one of the important means by which the Malazan Empire expanded. Really, it was a huge tactical advantage. But nevertheless, these soldiers are, for the most part, with a few exceptions, of course, they're us. They're scrambling around trying to do their best in these very scary and overwhelming situations. And that's something that came across to me while I was reading Orb, Sceptre, Throne. For some reason, that just hit me very hard, how I identify the most with these soldiers and their humor and everything else, and the bonds that they form in these situations in which they're overwhelmed are really something special, just beautifully portrayed in both series, actually. So I don't know if that's a common reading of the Malazan soldiers or not, but that's how I feel it.
Because and I love this point, because one of the things that a lot of the soldier characters, a lot of the human characters, because there are non-human characters in this fantasy world.
Oh yeah.
But one of the things that typically I think gets explored is the frailty and fragility of human life, that there are these immense powers, orders of magnitude more powerful than your ordinary bog standard human, that they are living in a world of frightening, monstrous powers who are walking around. And yet, despite showing us that fragility, despite showing that level of the dangerous mortality, that our lives can be snuffed out in an instant, it also shows the power, the strength, and the beauty of human friendship, human ingenuity, what humans can achieve when they set their mind to it, when they work together, when they dedicate themselves to something. And that is something that I find fascinating, that it is both at once showing the weakness and frailness of humanity, but also this wonderful strength and power to humanity, because we have soldiers from every walk of life. Some come from despicable backgrounds and over time grow and change. We have others come from quite noble or affluent backgrounds, and they grow to understand their points of connection to everyone else, that they are no longer holding themselves apart. We see characters who they're in a military unit together and they can't stand one another because they're not the type of people that you would sit and go, yeah, this is my best friend and we share a lot of things in common. They have nothing in common. Everyone's tics and habits gets on everyone else's nerves. But when push comes to shove, there is a bond between them. Yeah. And ultimately that bond proves so strong. And we see this time and time again, that it starts as perhaps a level of respect and then over time grows into a type of friendship. And it's exploring how friendships can occur between, and we see this in the real world, between the most unlikely of people. Yeah. We see relationships sometimes, and I don't know if you've ever noticed this amongst your friends, where you go, how did they end up together? Because really, like, how does that even work? It makes no sense.
Right.
But those two people find something in each other, that the jagged edges of one match perfectly with the jagged edges of the other, and they fit together.
Yeah.
And in exploring this, it makes us face that concept that life is far more complicated. Relationships are far more complicated. And there are levels to friendship and respect and understanding that can grow in the unlikeliest of circumstances and actually be very powerful bonds.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating look at humanity from that perspective.
Yeah, it's beautiful, really. Well, speaking of people who can't stand each other, my nemesis. We've had another excellent discussion, for which I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because you always, I just learned so much, and I enjoy this so much. I really do. And I'm looking forward very much to getting to the spoilers, which will again be appearing on your channel, A Critical Dragon. So everybody stay tuned for that. But thank you so much, JP.
And thank you, Philip. This has been, again, it's so much fun, and I do love going on to talk about we'll go and record the spoiler chat now, because there's lots of stuff that I really want to talk about, because I want to get more into talking about aspects of the magic and the history, and the history of the Segula and the Moranth and the Tist Andi and everything that's going on there. There are these fascinating things that we get so much information about and explored in such interesting ways in this book. Absolutely. And so having these conversations with you, this is like whetting your appetite for the next chat. So thanks once again for having me on, and happy birthday again.
Thank you. And the mystery birthday gift, we'll see what happens with that, I guess. So yeah. All right. Till next time.